Okay, open up your text, if you would, to the Pojman article, and then also put your finger in the Nathanson article. Okay, think with me for just a minute about punishment in general before we talk about capital punishment in particular. So why do we have legal punishments, for example? A bunch of us are legal studies majors. Let's think about the ethics of punishment. What are the purposes of punishment? What is punishment supposed to accomplish? Reducing bad behavior. That's good. Among whom? The people being punished? Society in general? Both, maybe? Yeah, I think it's both. For sure, one of the main purposes of punishment is deterrence. And that means both the convicted criminal, who by virtue of punishment is kept from doing it again, and also other would-be criminals who, observing the punishment, decide not themselves to engage in the criminal acts they would otherwise do. Okay, other purposes of punishment. Retribution, yeah, absolutely. Justice for those who have been victimized, or for the family members of those who have been victimized, or even if everyone who is immediately impacted by the crime is not around anymore. Still, on the retribution justification, it might be just to mete out punishment like capital punishment so as to right the scales of injustice in the universe. Other purposes of punishment. What's that? Justice. Okay, and does that mean retribution? Do you mean like retributive justice? Yeah, okay. Good. Others? Consistency. Expand on that just a little bit.
It was like following a trend of what should be punishable.
Okay.
Yeah, predictability.
Predictability, what should be punishable. How about this then? I'm going to totally put words in your mouth, man. But I'll take the lecture in the direction I want. How about this? How about in order to say things about ourselves and the values that we uphold? Something like that? Okay. So as a way of publicly stating values or public values proclamation. Destiny.
Rehabilitation.
Ooh, rehabilitation. Okay, I like that one. You can't do that with capital punishment, can you? But it is a purpose of punishment, for sure. All right, this is a great starting point, these four. Let's go through them one by one and just talk about the ethics of each of these purposes of punishment, and then we'll we'll narrow the lecture a little bit and begin to talk about capital punishment. Deterrence is one of the classic justifications of punishment. It's a consequentialist justification of punishment. In other words, the punishment is justified because doing so brings about a better overall outcome than would otherwise occur. Not necessarily better for everyone involved, but better for the society as a whole. On most ethical treatments of punishment, the fact of punishment itself is seen as a bad. Okay, let me emphasize that for a second. Punishment itself inflicts harm upon someone by limiting their ability to be mobile, like confining them to a jail cell or something, by fining them and harming them financially, by requiring sacrifices from them, like time in community service, or even by executing them. That's obviously a serious harm to someone. So the punishment itself is a bad. So we need some way to justify, inflicting a bad upon someone. And the classic, a classic definition of that justification is the deterrence one. The bad of punishment is justifiable if it will bring about a greater overall good for society. The greater overall good might come from confining the convicted criminal and preventing him from committing further murders or further thefts or further whatevers. I'm not sure if he's dead yet, but for a long time, Charles Manson was the longest serving prisoner in the California system. He's famous for the Manson murders, late 1960s murders of movie actors and actresses. Okay, and it was decided that he was so dangerous to society, California didn't have the death penalty, but they confined him for basically the rest of his life. The convicted criminal needed to be confined so that he would not, it was deterrence, so he would not do terrible things again. But at the same time, deterrence is also justified because others observe this. Others observe it happening. I have seen this with my children. So both my older daughters know where the sweets are kept in the house. And the second daughter helped herself a couple weeks ago to where the sweets were kept. And she got a very lengthy time out. This was impressionable upon the older one. She saw what had happened to the second one, and she came and announced to us, "I will not get the chocolates." It clearly made an impact. Would-be criminals are deterred by virtue of observing the punishment that others receive. Okay, now, almost no one these days disputes deterrence as a justification for punishment. It is pretty much morally agreed upon as a valuable thing. The disputes come in where the efficacy of the deterrence is discussed. So, for instance, think about this in the context of the death penalty. Deterrence, many would argue, is not an especially effective prevention of capital murders. States that have capital punishments, depending on the sociology study that you're seeing, arguably, do not necessarily have lower murder rates than those that do not. Okay, but there's a lot of dispute about this, and it all depends on what kind of research you're seeing. And a lot of people would say, even if the research suggests that no actual deterrent value is present in states where capital punishment is available, still, it's not because of the fact of the deterrence itself being inadequate. Rather, it's because the justice in the capital case, in all capital cases, takes so long to happen. A 20-year cycle is not exactly a deterrent, they would argue. Okay, you might imagine the incredible deterrent value that would be immediately available in society if we could strike with lightning every capital murderer right as soon as he committed the capital murder. Okay, so like if God, for instance, every time somebody murdered somebody else, if God just like struck them down with lightning, like right there, people wouldn't do it, would they? There would be incredible deterrence. So advocates of deterrence say the sociology studies that suggest that there's no strong deterrent effect in states with capital punishment aren't necessarily adequate in proving that deterrence does not in principle work. Okay, more on that in a little bit. Much more controversial as a definition for punishment these days in post-Enlightenment societies, especially in the last 50 or 100 years, is the retribution notion. Retribution Notion. Maybe this is because of a loss of faith in God or in some cosmic justice in the universe among modern people. If people are generally relativists about ethics, then they're probably not going to be as confident that there's such a thing as justice that needs to be realized, or some sort of scale of justice in the universe that needs to be righted, some wrong that needs to be made correct so that justice is brought about. Let me actually camp on this for just a minute. We haven't really actually gotten to capital punishment in detail yet. But what do you guys think? If there were no deterrent value to punishment, so bracket that and bracket the Public Values Proclamation and the rehabilitation justifications. Suppose it's just retribution, retributive justice. In other words, punishment for the sake of bringing about justice. If you take someone else's eye, your eye should be taken. If you knock out someone else's tooth, your tooth should be knocked out, that sort of thing. Would that be an adequate justification for punishment? Would you favor criminal punishments on the basis of retribution alone? What do you guys think? Okay, I'm seeing several people nodding their heads. If you do favor it on the basis of retribution alone, and by the way, I do, just I'll show my cards. But why? What's the case to be made there? If no consequential value can be found in the punishment. Need some help here. What do people think? Yeah, Madeline.
Well, from a legal standpoint or like a state point of view, if you don't punish anyone and you don't offer any sort of justice for wrongdoing, then you try to take it into your own hands, and then you're just going to create more criminals by not punishing anyone who commits a crime.
Okay, so I think that's a great start. I love it that you jumped in there. That's kind of a quasi-deterrent justification, isn't it? So as to prevent people from taking justice into their own hands. Let's explore deeper, though, and follow your line of reasoning. Why do we want to prevent people from taking justice into their own hands? Why would they try to take justice into their own hands? They felt like something had happened to them that should not have happened to them. Okay, maybe a theft of property or the death of a relative or some other wrong had been committed to them, against them. But this seems to suggest that there is such a thing as right and wrong, and when people are wronged, that standard of right and wrong has been violated, right? Is that something that we have to assume in order to buy the retributive understanding of justice? I think so. I think you have to assume that there is such a thing as justice as such across persons. And seriously, this is a spot where even the hard-bitten relativists can't sustain their worldviews. Because if you're a relativist, look, let me follow you to your house and steal all your things. And it shouldn't matter to you that I have taken all of your things, and yet it does always matter to them. Because it's an unsustainable perspective at the end of the day, because they think that there is some sort of justice that has been violated and that they've been wronged, and that justice has objective purchase. Okay, retribution has fallen on harder times these days, though, just because among those who have not themselves been wronged, but who are observing others who have been wronged, it is harder to make the case that the criminals who have wronged the third parties, the others, ought to be punished because people feel so quasi-relativistic these days and think there's no real cosmic sense of justice. So why should we punish just for the sake of upholding something that's not there? Okay, but I personally do happen to think that there is a cosmic sense of justice, partly because I'm a theist. But even if I weren't a theist, I think I would still hold to that. At any rate, though, I am a theist, and so I do think that that's a justifiable definition. Public Values Proclamation. Okay, there's a whole cottage industry of literature on how this is a justification for punishment. It's just a way of saying who we are and what we stand for, what we value in this culture. Okay, if you rape a woman, you're going to get serious punishment for doing that, because that's not something that we do in this culture. The legal code, and more generally, the social mores surrounding the legal code, are a way of proclaiming the values that we stand for. And that's of great value to the society, because it's important for societies to have outlets that give them regular values proclamation opportunities. One last justification of punishment, at least there are others, but we'll talk about this one here today. Rehabilitation, obviously not in play for capital punishment. It's kind of controversial these days, because the statistics from the empirical studies that the sociologists do suggest that rehabilitation doesn't happen at very high levels at all. In fact, going to jail seems to have precisely the opposite effect on people. Once you go to jail, you become more likely to do other crimes of a similar nature. Maybe it's because you encounter people who tell you ways to do it that you didn't know how to do beforehand. Okay, maybe it's because you are discouraged and the system has got you down and there's no way you see out of it other than to do acts of criminality. Maybe it's for other reasons, just the general cultural malaise of being imprisoned. At any rate, though, rehabilitation is controversial because the sociology studies suggest that it's not always especially successful. Although in principle, it is something that can work. And it does work for some. It does work for some. But it's not something that's always especially successful in our criminal justice system. Speaking as a parent, I would say punishment for the purpose of rehabilitation only works if the punishment is accompanied by substantial love. So I do actually spank my children, but only when they've done like really egregious wrongs, like lying to mommy after being warned twice against it, or like serious, or something like, I had the older one take a little plastic flute that she got from Dollar Tree, and she was beating her baby sister over the head, the 1-year-old. And we had told her not to do that, and she did it anyway. I don't know if people just sin because they love sin, like Augustine says. But she was beating her sister. Anyway, she got spanking. But you only spank as a parent when after the spanking you administer love. And you hug the kid and let the kid know you are welcome back into the family. You're never apart from the family, right? You are present with us as a member of the family who we love dearly, okay? And I personally think that rehabilitation in punishment, as justification for punishment, only works if it's administered with love. And obviously, the state of Texas can't really do that. They can't embrace you in their arms and hug you and let you know you're a welcome member of society again or something. Okay? General comments on any of these ideas about punishment? Good. I'm going to stop there. We didn't actually get into capital punishment in particular, but I do want to go over a sample paper now, so I'm going to stop there for today, and next week we will get into the capital punishment cases. Okay?